Silence. That was the first thing everyone noticed. For weeks, the vast networks of comms relays had carried nothing but empty static. Human fleets that once sent daily transmissions, updates, patrol logs, even simple chatter, were gone. Entire armadas, the pride of humanity's expansion across the stars, had vanished without a single distress call. It wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. Because silence in the void always meant one thing. Something had gone horribly wrong. The other empires noticed. Humanity had always been the stubborn force among the stars, unpredictable yet unshakable. They fought with cunning, built with speed, and endured storms that should have broken them. But now, 5 empires, the Core Dominion, the Veyran Sovereignty, the Thalan Collective, the Draxus Enclave, and the Mirren Ascendancy, looked toward human space with suspicion and fear. Their councils whispered of betrayal, of hidden weapons, of humans preparing for a strike. And when no word came from the missing fleets, whispers turned to fire. 5 empires united not in peace, but in wrath. At the edge of human-controlled sectors, the first fleets began to gather. Great carriers darkened the skies of border worlds. Cruisers floated above colonies like predators, their weapons locked and waiting. To the civilians, the sudden presence of alien war machines was a nightmare come alive. To the empires, it was a necessary show of force. If humanity's fleets had fallen silent because of treachery, then vengeance would be swift. If the silence was weakness, then conquest would follow. Either way, no one would wait quietly. On Earth and on dozens of core human worlds, governments tried to maintain calm. Officials assured their people that the fleets would return, that this was a temporary blackout. But the truth bled through every attempt at control. Rumors spread faster than news, fleets annihilated in some distant trap, admirals taken hostage by alien conspiracies, colonies burned before they could even signal for help. Fear became the rhythm of daily life. Every family with someone serving beyond the stars stared at silent comm boards, waiting for voices that never returned. And in the hidden rooms where decisions were made, human leaders faced a grim reality. They had no answers. The fleets were gone, and they could not explain why. To admit weakness would invite invasion. To posture strength risked sparking all-out war. But as the 5 empires pressed harder, sending messages that carried less diplomacy and more threat, the humans understood one thing clearly. They were running out of time. Far beyond the heart of civilization, in the cold silence where the fleets had vanished. The wreckage told its own story. Broken hulls drifted without lights, torn apart not by conventional weapons, but by something stranger. Entire sections of ships had been sheared clean, as if cut by invisible blades. Others bore scars of energy so concentrated that even the strongest alloys had bubbled like wax. But no bodies were found, no survivors drifting in escape pods. The fleets had not simply been destroyed, they had been erased in a way no known empire could explain. And yet, none of the 5 powers would believe it. To them, humans were hiding the truth. On a border station orbiting the red star of Vera Prime, a tense meeting unfolded. Human envoys stood before towering alien delegates, their faces lined with fatigue but their voices unbroken. They insisted that humanity sought only answers, not war. They pleaded for investigation, for time. But the chamber's silence was heavy, broken only by the sharp, cold words of the Veyran speaker. No word is itself a weapon. You think silence protects you, but silence is guilt. The chamber roared with alien agreement. And in that instant, every human in the room knew the outcome. The 5 empires had already chosen their path. The first attack came without warning. A human outpost on the rim, lightly defended and already stretched thin, vanished under a storm of fire. Orbital cannons shredded the sky, while ground forces swept in like locusts. By the time a distress signal pierced the void, it was already too late. The five empires wanted more than answers. They wanted proof of dominance. And in striking, they showed the galaxy that humanity's silence was weakness to be exploited. But not everyone believed the lie. Among the alien commanders were a few who hesitated, who wondered if something darker lingered behind the missing fleets. Even they could not deny the unease that rippled through their ranks. Why had humanity not fought back yet? Why had their vaunted admirals, known for defiance, not answered the Empire's threats with steel? What force could silence fleets that had once stood against the strongest navies in the stars? In hidden corridors and abandoned colonies, whispers spread of something else moving in the void. Something watching. Something that had not struck only at humans, but had chosen them first. And if that was true, then the wrath of five empires was not only misdirected, it was a dangerous mistake. In the cold dark of space, a lone human ship drifted, its lights dim, its engines silent. Inside, survivors clung to life, their faces gaunt, their voices cracked from days without proper food or sleep. They carried a message, a warning about what had truly happened to the fleets. But their comm systems were broken, and alien patrols hunted the void with ruthless precision. If they were caught, the truth would die with them. And so the galaxy moved closer to a storm no one understood. Five empires united in fury. Humanity standing on the edge of annihilation. And somewhere in the shadows, the true enemy waited, unseen and patient. The silence was not an end. It was only the beginning. The human colonies braced for war. The empires prepared their fleets for final conquest. And in the heart of space, where the wreckage of humanity's greatest warships floated like silent tombs, something stirred. The silence broke, not with words, not with diplomacy, but with the cold, sudden signal of ships that should not exist. And when that signal reached both human worlds and alien empires alike, the war everyone thought they understood took a turn no one was ready for. The signal spread like fire across the stars. It was faint, fragmented, but unmistakably human. Every listening post, every comm station, every empire ship scanning the void caught pieces of it. At first it was thought to be some kind of trap, a trick to bait fleets into ambush. But the longer it played, the more chilling it became. The voice was strained, broken, the sound of someone who had seen too much. We are not destroyed. We are not lost. But what hunts us is not what you think. Do not, repeat, do not engage them as if they are one of you. They are not. They are beyond. Then the signal cut out, leaving only static and a weight of fear heavier than silence. For the five empires, the message was fuel. Leaders declared it proof that humanity had been hiding something, proof that humans had played with powers forbidden and now sought to drag others down with them. They ordered their fleets forward, their war drums echoing through the void. For the ordinary soldiers, though, the signal carried something else, a doubt. If this was truly human deception, why did the voice sound so broken, so desperate? And if it wasn't a lie, then what force was strong enough to tear fleets apart and leave survivors drifting like ghosts? On Earth, the transmission brought no relief. It raised more questions than answers. Who sent it? Where had it come from? Why had only fragments reached them? Human command scrambled to trace its origin, but the coordinates shifted every time. It was as if the ship that sent it wasn't drifting in one place, but sliding through shadows no map could track. Still, the fact that survivors existed gave a spark of hope to a weary people. Families who had nearly given up on their loved ones now clung tighter to the thought that someone was out there, fighting to return. In a secure bunker beneath the ruins of an old city, leaders of the Human Alliance gathered in secret. Around the table, their faces were drawn tight with sleepless nights and impossible choices. Some argued for defense, for protecting the colonies that still stood. Others pressed for immediate retaliation against the empires massing at their borders, but a quieter voice reminded them of the signal. If we fight the wrong enemy, we bleed for nothing. Something else is moving in the dark. We cannot ignore it. The room fell silent, because deep down, each of them felt the same unease. Yet none dared say it aloud, that humanity's fleets might not have been defeated by war as they knew it, but by something entirely outside their understanding. Out on the rim, in places where human colonies brushed close to alien borders, the situation worsened by the day. Patrol ships reported skirmishes with Draxus raiders, Mirran scouts probing deep into forbidden zones, Varen warbands tearing through trade routes. Civilians fled wherever they could, crowding onto transports not built for mass evacuations. The skies above once quiet worlds filled with smoke and fire, as alien fleets pushed harder, convinced that conquest was only a strike away. To them, humans appeared divided and weakened. To humans, it felt like the noose was tightening. And still, rumors grew. Refugees whispered of ships that did not belong to any empire, vast and cold, sliding out of the dark to cut through fleets, without warning. Survivors spoke of sudden flashes of impossible light, of weapons that bent reality itself, of enemies who left no bodies behind, only empty ships drifting like hollow shells. Some dismissed these stories as panic, others kept quiet. Because to admit they might be true was to accept that humanity and the five empires alike had underestimated what stalked them. In the broken silence, the survivors of one lost fleet moved carefully. Their ship, once a proud war cruiser, was now little more than patched hull and failing life support. Inside, the crew clung to survival with grit and desperation. They had seen the first attack, the way the void itself seemed to split and something impossible came through. They had watched ships vanish without sound, without wreckage. They had felt their comms scramble as if reality itself twisted against them. And they knew the truth the rest of the galaxy refused to believe. The five empires were not preparing for war against humans. They were preparing for war against shadows they did not understand. And in doing so, they were walking into a trap, far larger than anyone could imagine. Among the survivors was a young officer who carried the burden of memory. Every night he replayed the last moments of his fleet. Every explosion, every scream, every desperate order that had gone unanswered haunted him. He kept logs, not for command, but for the future, because if they died, someone had to know what had really happened. His words were heavy with exhaustion, but sharp with conviction. The enemy is not Draxus. The enemy is not Varen. The enemy is not human. It is something else. And if they all keep fighting each other, no one will survive what's coming. Yet, across the galaxy, the fires of war only burned hotter. Alien propaganda painted humans as liars who hid weapons forbidden by every treaty. Human broadcasts showed alien fleets destroying civilian stations and colonies, calling them aggressors. Both sides built walls of hate, fueled by fear and ignorance. And while the stars filled with preparations for the largest war in centuries, the real enemy watched from the shadows, silent and patient. The message that had broken the silence, still, echoed, bouncing from relay to relay, half corrupted, half clear. No one could trace its path, but everyone could feel its weight. Some ignored it. Some mocked it. But others, soldiers, refugees, even alien scouts, held on to its warning like a shard of truth buried in lies. And quietly, in hidden corners, small groups began to ask the question their leaders refused to consider. What if the war was the wrong fight? What if silence was not humanity's betrayal, but humanity's wound? The five empires prepared to strike deeper into human territory. Human commanders braced to defend with what little remained. And far from both, a single survivor ship flickered in and out of detection, as if it drifted between worlds unseen. Its crew whispered prayers to engines that barely held together, and every time they managed to send fragments of warning, they risked drawing the attention of the very thing they fled. The galaxy teetered on the edge of catastrophe. Fear ruled every council, every battlefield, every family waiting for word that never came. Humanity, cornered and desperate, held its breath. The empires, armed and wrathful, sharpened their blades, and in the space between stars, the unseen enemy moved closer. The silence was breaking again, but what came with it would not be words. It would be fire. The war drums grew louder. Across human space, colonies fortified themselves while families abandoned homes they had built across generations. Cargo freighters were stripped down and converted into makeshift transports, carrying frightened civilians to core worlds that might not be safer, but at least felt closer to Earth. Every broadcast repeated the same warnings: alien fleets advancing, stations falling silent, borders collapsing under the weight of 5 empires pressing in from every direction. It was not just a war for territory. It was a war for survival, and humanity was outnumbered. On the front lines, soldiers stared across the void at ships that filled their sensors like storm clouds. The Draxis Enclave had positioned their massive war beasts, living organisms shaped into carriers, their wings stretching wide enough to blot out stars. The Mirren Ascendancy's crystalline fleets shimmered in eerie silence, their weapons pulsing with energy drawn from sources humans barely understood. The Varen sovereignty bristled with discipline, lines of warships locked into formations designed to suffocate any resistance, and behind them came the Thalon Collective, a swarm of thousands of smaller craft buzzing like angry insects, their numbers endless. Each empire hated the other, but now they moved as one, their wrath focused squarely on humanity. From the bridge of a battered human destroyer, the captain studied the incoming reports with quiet dread. He had fought against Draxis raiders before. He had held the line against Thalon swarms. But never had he seen them united. Never had he seen such numbers aimed at a single enemy. His crew worked in tense silence, their hands moving across controls that hummed with failing power. They knew the odds, and yet none abandoned their posts. Humanity had been cornered before. Survival was not just instinct, it was pride. In the command halls of Earth, strategy shifted every hour. Some leaders argued to strike first, to show the empires that humans would not bow. Others demanded retreat, conserving strength for a longer fight. Still others pressed for diplomacy, begging for a chance to explain that something darker was at play. But every attempt to reach out to the empires met only silence, or worse, cold replies laced with threats. No one wanted to listen. No one wanted to believe. Humanity's voice, once loud in the councils of the stars, was drowned beneath accusations. And fear. Meanwhile, the survivors drifting in the crippled cruiser fought their own battle against time. Their supplies were nearly gone, their engines failing. Every attempt to send warnings risked discovery, yet they knew the galaxy needed the truth. Late into the long nights, they argued among themselves. Should they try to reach human command and deliver their message directly, even if it meant certain death? Or should they continue scattering fragments across the void, hoping someone would piece the puzzle together before it was too late? Each choice carried weight, and each passing day brought them closer to silence. Among the crew was a medic who had seen more than she could bear. She had tended to men and women whose bodies bore wounds no known weapon could make. She had looked into the empty eyes of comrades who seemed to fade not from blood loss, but from something deeper, as if life itself had been drained by unseen hands. She carried these memories in silence, but inside she feared the truth more than starvation. The enemy was not only powerful, it was unnatural, and if the 5 empires kept pressing humanity into war, they would never see the true strike coming until it was too late. Back on a border colony, a group of young civilians prepared to evacuate. They had never held weapons, never served in fleets, yet war found them all the same. Families packed essentials into crates while children cried at leaving homes they would never see again. Among them was an old man who had lived through the first human wars with the empires. He watched the sky darken with alien ships and whispered a truth no one wanted to hear. They think they are punishing us, but they are only breaking the walls that hold back what hunts in the dark. His words were ignored, dismissed as fear from an old mind. Yet later, when the colony's defenses lit up in desperate fire, his warning echoed in every scream dot inside the Veyron command fleet. Officers debated their next move. Many celebrated, convinced humanity would crumble quickly. But a few, veterans who had seen strange signals on their own borders, argued caution. They had intercepted fragments like the human warning, strange bursts of data that did not match, human or alien design. They had dismissed them as tricks. Now, hearing the human signal repeat, they wondered if they had been wrong. Their doubts, however, were drowned beneath the sovereign's command. The war had been declared, and hesitation had no place in the Veyron doctrine. The Mirren ascendancy, proud and ancient, cared little for human words. To them, silence was weakness, and weakness deserved annihilation. Their fleets glided forward, like blades, carving through outposts without remorse. Yet even within their crystalline halls, a whisper spread among the younger generations. Rumors of battles lost to ships that were not human. Rumors of Mirren cruisers found adrift with no crew, their hulls untouched, yet their energy cores drained to nothing. The elders silenced these voices. But unease grew in the shadows of their empire. The Draxus, ever hungry for conquest, embraced the war with savage joy. Their war beasts roared across human skies, their soldiers tearing through colonies. Yet, even they could not ignore the strange. In the heat of their victories, entire squads vanished without trace. Ships reported phantom signals, cries for help in voices that did not belong to their kind. Some whispered of shadows moving in their wake, devouring stragglers when no one watched. But the Enclave silenced such talk with blood, branding it cowardice. They would not admit fear, even as fear gnawed at them from within. And through all this, humanity endured. Small ships darted through enemy lines, striking fast before disappearing into the void. Stations once meant for trade became fortresses, their cannons turning skies into firestorms. Soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, refused to surrender. They fought not only for survival but for the hope that one day the truth would be known, that they had not betrayed the galaxy, that they had not fallen silent by choice. The human spirit, battered and scarred, remained unbroken. But with every passing day, the true enemy drew closer. Its presence was felt in the way sensors glitched for no reason, in the way fleets vanished without debris, in the way silence always followed moments of chaos, deeper than before, as if the void itself was swallowing life. Some began to suspect that war between humans and the empires was not just a tragedy, but a distraction, a smokescreen that allowed something else to grow stronger. The galaxy moved forward blind, driven by wrath, by pride, by fear. Humanity stood on the edge of annihilation. The 5 empires sharpened their knives, and in the darkness between stars, unseen eyes watched, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The silence had not ended. It was spreading. The stars over the rim burned with war. Human defense fleets pulled together in desperate lines, ships that were never meant to stand shoulder to shoulder now forming walls of steel and fire. Old destroyers that should have been scrapped, cargo haulers refitted with makeshift guns, and proud battleships still scarred from earlier wars. All of them floated in the darkness like weary guardians. Their crews knew what was coming. Across the void, 5 empires advanced, their fleets stretching so wide the human scanners could not chart their full reach. It was not a siege, it was a storm, and humanity was standing in its path. Every comm channel buzzed with voices. Orders barked. From command, pleas from civilians trying to flee, whispers of doubt among soldiers who knew they might not live to see another sunrise. But even in fear, there was resolve. This was not the first time humanity had faced impossible odds. Stories of survival, of outlasting stronger enemies, echoed through every broadcast. Yet this time felt different. This time the silence from the missing fleets loomed like a shadow over them all. If those ships could vanish, what hope did the rest have? On one border world, a city of steel domes prepared for impact. Families crammed into underground shelters, while militia units stood guard with weapons that looked far too small against the ships gathering in the skies. Above them, human frigates locked into formations around the planet, their shields glowing faint blue in the night. From the ground, the sight was both beautiful and terrifying, a net of fragile light straining to hold back a tide of darkness. Children asked when the soldiers would come home. Parents gave answers they didn't believe. The silence of the Gi. Missing fleets had already stolen too many truths. In the high councils of the Five Empires, confidence was spoken aloud, but fear lurked underneath. The Veyran sovereignty's generals spoke of crushing humanity in one swift strike, but some of their scouts whispered of phantom readings in the outer sectors. The Mirran ascendancy plotted to erase human colonies as lessons, but younger officers wondered about their own cruisers that had gone missing without battle. The Thaon collectives swarmed with reckless eagerness, yet their commanders could not explain why several of their hive ships had ceased transmitting in mid-flight. The Draxus enclave roared for blood, yet even their brutal captains had begun to notice shadows following their war beasts. The truth pressed in on them all, but pride smothered doubt. To admit another enemy stalked them would mean halting the war, and none were willing to appear weak. The survivors drifting in their broken cruiser finally picked up pieces of the incoming storm. Their sensors flickered with the signatures of fleets too large to count. They listened in silence as human comms cried for reinforcements that would never come. They heard alien commands promising swift annihilation, and still they tried to warn, sending fragments of their own truth into the void. But each time they broadcast, their systems sputtered, as if some unseen hand was reaching out to choke them. The young officer who kept the logs stared at the static with hollow eyes. "It knows," he whispered. "Every time we speak, it knows." On the human flagship that anchored the defense line, tension hung like smoke. Officers moved quickly between stations, voices tight with urgency. The admiral, a man who had fought half his life against alien borders, stood at the center, in silence. He had no illusions. He knew his ships were outnumbered, his weapons outmatched. Yet retreat was not an option. If they broke now, the colonies behind them would fall in days. His crew watched him closely, drawing strength from his stillness. To falter was to die. To stand was to endure. That was humanity's way, and then the void trembled, At first, it was only sensors flickering, the faint distortion of space as the alien fleets pressed closer. But then came something else. A wave of static rolled across comms, silencing channels in mid-sentence. Lights dimmed on ships across the defense line. Even the alien formations slowed, their own signals breaking apart. For a moment, silence ruled the battlefield. Not the silence of waiting, but the same silence that had swallowed the missing fleets. Every soldier felt it in their bones. Every commander froze. It was not a weapon they knew, not a tactic they understood. It was something older, deeper, like the void itself had opened its mouth to swallow them. Human crews clutched their controls tighter. Alien officers barked orders in panic. And in that stillness, the survivors' warning seemed to echo louder than ever. Do not engage them as if they are one of you. They are not. The five empires ignored the unease. With fury driving them, they opened fire. Beams of light lanced across the void. Missiles streaked, cannons thundered. The human line returned fire, the night of space blooming with firestorms. Entire ships vanished in bursts of light. Shields flared and shattered. Debris spun away like burning meteors. The war had begun in full. On the ground below, civilians watched the sky tear apart. The fragile net of shields trembled as alien fire poured down. Buildings shook, alarms screamed, children wept in shelters. Above them, human. Frigates fought like wolves, darting between enemy lines, striking and vanishing before overwhelming fire caught them. For every alien ship destroyed, 10 more pushed forward. The defenders bled, but they did not break. And yet, as the battle raged, something else stirred. In the chaos, entire wings of ships, human and alien alike, simply disappeared. No explosions, no wreckage, just sudden absence. Pilots screamed over comms one moment, and the next, silence. Some sensors caught faint glimmers, shapes that moved too fast, too strange to belong to either side. Then those two vanished, erased from memory. As if they had never been. On the alien flagship, the Veyron speaker demanded explanations. None came. Their officers stammered about ghost signals, about energy spikes no system could identify. But still they pressed the attack, convinced that overwhelming firepower would crush humanity before these shadows mattered. Pride blinded them, even as fear crept into their hearts. On the human flagship, the admiral tightened his jaw as reports flooded in. Entire squadrons gone. Enemy ships vanishing without trace. Strange readings breaking every rule of war. He had prepared for the Empire's fury, but not for this. Still, he stood unbroken, giving orders with steady calm. If they were to fall, they would fall as humans had always lived, fighting to the last breath. In the crippled cruiser, the survivors felt the same distortion ripple through their failing hull. They had seen this before, at the start of their nightmare. They knew what came next. One of them whispered through clenched teeth, "It's here." And though they could not see it yet, they felt it closing in. The battle reached its fever pitch. Human ships pushed harder, refusing to yield even as their numbers dwindled. Alien fleets surged, confident in their victory even as shadows picked at their flanks. Civilians clung to each other in shelters, their prayers drowned beneath the roar of war. Across every screen, every sensor, every heart, the same dread grew. The silence was not just returning, it was spreading through the battlefield, swallowing everything in its path. And in that moment, as fire lit the stars and the void itself trembled, both humanity and the five empires realized the same terrifying truth. The war they thought they were fighting was never the real battle. The true enemy had arrived. The battlefield was chaos. Human ships fought in burning lines. Alien fleets surged forward in overwhelming numbers. And then, without warning, whole squadrons from both sides vanished, as if the void itself had swallowed them. The silence that followed was worse than the explosions. Voices cut off mid-sentence. Screens showed empty space where ships should have been. Even the survivors of the lost human cruiser, drifting far from the fight, felt the distortion reach them, like a ripple running through reality itself. At first, commanders on both sides blamed hidden weapons. The Veyron sovereignty accused humans of deploying forbidden technology. Human officers claimed the empires had unleashed some monstrous device. But in truth, neither side understood. The shadows that moved between stars were not bound to fleets or factions. They struck without pattern, erasing humans and aliens alike. And as the battle raged, something new appeared, a signal unlike any before. It was faint, broken, but it carried words in a language that should not have existed. Across human and alien systems, it played at once, translated into tongues no one expected to hear. You fight over ashes. You bleed for nothing. The silence is not your enemy. The silence is the cage you built. The message repeated once, then collapsed into static. No origin could be found, no ship could be tracked. But its timing cut deep, because in the middle of war, both sides realized something had been watching all along. On the human flagship, the admiral's fists clenched against the console. His officers looked to him for answers, but there were none. He gave the only order he could: hold the line. The empires would not believe him if he explained, and his own people needed to see strength. Yet inside, he felt a truth he could not share. This was not a war humans could win with weapons alone. In the alien command chambers, panic spread behind closed doors. Mirran strategists whispered of ancient warnings carved into crystal archives, prophecies of hunters who came when empires grew arrogant. Draxus commanders argued over whether the silence was prey or predator, while their war beasts howled against invisible threats. The Thalon collective lost hive ships without knowing why. Their swarms cut apart as if by unseen blades. And the Veyran speaker, furious at losing control, demanded the war continue even faster, as if drowning humanity in fire would erase the fear growing in his own ranks. The survivors aboard the crippled cruiser finally received fragments of the strange signal. Their systems barely processed it. Yet they recognized the cadence. It was not human. It was not alien. It was something older. One of them whispered, "It's speaking to all of us. It doesn't care who wins." Their captain, weak from wounds but steady in voice, replied, "Then it's not here to conquer. It's here to finish what we started." The words left the crew in silence because they all knew he was right. On the ground, civilians huddled in shelters as the skies burned. They had grown used to the roar of alien bombardments, but when whole fleets vanished without a sound, they felt the deeper terror. Children clung to their parents, asking why the stars had gone dark in patches, why the soldiers could not stop it. No parent had an answer. Fear of alien fleets had been replaced by something worse: fear of the unknown. The kind of fear that broke spirits faster than any weapon. As the war escalated, the second twist revealed itself. The silence was not only swallowing ships, it was bending the battlefield itself. Space warped in places, pulling vessels out of formation, scattering. Fleets as though invisible currents dragged them apart. Weapons misfired. Shields collapsed without reason, and ships were hurled against each other by unseen hands. Human and alien alike realized they were no longer fighting each other. They were fighting to keep their fleets intact against the void itself. The first to notice the pattern were human engineers monitoring sensor distortions. They saw the anomalies lining up in ways too precise to be random. It was not chaos. It was design. The silence was shaping the war, guiding destruction, herding both sides into corners. When the admiral was shown the data, his face darkened. "It's not here to kill us quickly," he said quietly. "It's arranging us, like pieces on a board." This revelation spread in whispers. Alien crews began deserting mid-battle, their fear greater than loyalty. Human officers caught fragments of enemy chatter, hearing the same desperation. For the first time, enemies saw each other not just as rivals, but as fellow prey. Yet the orders from above never changed. Leaders too proud to admit the truth kept, driving their fleets forward, convinced that to stop was to lose everything. The survivors of the crippled cruiser, desperate to be heard, tried once more to send their full log. Their systems flickered, nearly collapsing, but a burst of data reached both human and alien relays before cutting off. Inside it was the truth they had carried since the first fleet vanished, visual records of the silence taking form. The footage showed shadows slipping through ships like knives, entire crews vanishing while their vessels drifted hollow. It showed the same distortions now twisting the battlefield. For a few brief hours, fragments of the warnings spread through networks, undeniable and raw. But then the footage cut off everywhere at once. Screens went black. Records were erased. The silence itself had reached into systems and destroyed the message. Those who had seen it were left shaken, their words dismissed as panic or lies. And yet the memory clung, passed mouth to mouth, story to story, feeding the dread that grew stronger every day. The war reached its breaking point. Human lines held barely, their fleets burning down to the last reserves. Alien ships closed in, only to find themselves cut apart by forces they could not see. Colonies shook under bombardment, then fell eerily quiet when their attackers vanished mid-strike. No one could claim victory. No one could call it war anymore. It had become survival against something vast and unseen. And then came the second twist. The silence was not just an enemy. It was calling something else. Sensors across the battlefield detected new signals, massive energy waves converging from the far edge of the galaxy. At first they seemed random, like background noise. But as they grew stronger, every system confirmed the same terrifying truth. Something else was coming. Not the silence, but what the silence had been waiting for. On the human flagship, the Admiral gripped the edge of the console as the readings appeared. "This battle isn't the war," he said, his voice low but steady. "This was only the opening act." His crew stared at him, their hearts sinking. If the silence itself was this unstoppable, then what was it waiting to unleash? On the alien command ships, arguments turned to near mutiny. Officers shouted at leaders who still demanded humanity's destruction while ignoring the approaching storm. The Mirren elders spoke of archives that warned of harbingers beyond light. The Draxus warlords snarled, but fell quiet when their own beasts howled in terror at the unseen signals. Even the Thaln swarms, usually fearless, scattered in confusion. Across the battlefield, human and alien eyes lifted from their fight with each other and turned toward the growing waves of energy. The silence had not come to destroy them outright. It had come to weaken them, to scatter them, to bleed them until they were too fragile to resist what came next. The stars themselves seemed to darken as the signals drew closer. Sensors overloaded, comms filled with static, weapons jammed in their mounts. Civilians on planets looked up at skies that shimmered unnaturally, streaks of color bending across the heavens. Soldiers froze at their stations, realizing that the true enemy had not even revealed its face yet. The battle stopped, not because of truce, but because of fear. For the first time in history, humans and 5 empires stood in the same silence, staring into the void together. The war between them had not ended, but it no longer mattered. The galaxy was about to face something worse. And as the first shapes began to appear in the darkness beyond the fleets, larger than dreadnoughts, their outlines bending space around them, every soldier and every commander felt the same truth. Strike their hearts. They had been fighting the wrong war all along. The void rippled as the first shapes emerged. They were not ships in any sense humanity or the empires understood. They were vast, jagged forms of shifting matter and light, their outlines bending the stars behind them. Where they moved, space itself seemed to distort, tearing apart anything too close. Human destroyers shuddered and broke apart without a single shot fired. Alien cruisers split open as if invisible hands crushed their hulls. The silence had not been the enemy. It had been the herald, softening fleets, scattering defenses, and now guiding these things into the heart of the war. Every human and alien commander realized the same truth at once. Their war no longer mattered. To keep fighting each other, was to die together. The human admiral broke the calm silence first, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "This is not our fight against each other anymore. If you want to survive, you stand with us." For a long breath, the channel was filled with static. Then, slowly, alien voices answered. Not with trust, not with alliance, but with the grim understanding that survival left them no other choice. The five empires and humanity, bound by necessity, turned their weapons toward the greater threat. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Human ships, battered and outnumbered, fought with desperate precision. Alien fleets unleashed their most powerful arsenals. The sky lit up with storms of energy and fire, yet the enemy moved through it all untouched. Their forms split and rejoined, each strike scattering into nothing. Shields collapsed at their presence. Weapons flickered and died. The void filled with wreckage, but still the creatures advanced. It was not a fight of equals. It was slaughter. And yet humanity did not break. On the flagship, the admiral ordered, his fleet into formations that no alien would have dared. Old freighters were rammed into the enemy, detonating in blinding bursts. Frigates shielded battleships until they collapsed, giving others seconds more to fire. The empires followed suit, their pride drowned beneath raw survival. Mirren crystals cracked under stress, but held formation. Draxus war beasts hurled themselves at the enemy, clawing at shadows until they were torn apart. Even the Thalan swarms, scattered and terrified, reformed to strike at weak points. For the first time in history, the galaxy fought as one. The survivors in the crippled cruiser finally saw the truth of the enemy's design. The silence had been a cage, yes, but also a lure. The missing fleets had not been destroyed. They had been taken, twisted, integrated into the shapes now devouring the battlefield. Through broken sensors, the survivors glimpsed outlines inside the vast forms. The skeletons of human dreadnoughts and alien carriers fused into their flesh. Every missing ship was still there, but changed into something unrecognizable. The officer, who had carried the logs, felt his chest tighten. "They weren't erased," he whispered. "They were remade." Word of this revelation spread through desperate comms. The horror struck harder than the enemy's weapons. Soldiers realized they might not just be fighting monsters. They might be firing on their own, on crews who had once shared laughter and orders, now trapped inside twisted shells. The admiral gave the only command possible. "Do not hesitate. If they are ours, then they are gone. We free them with fire." His voice carried grief, but also resolve. To falter now meant extinction. The battle raged on, and slowly the combined fleets found patterns. The creatures were not invulnerable. Their forms shifted around cores of strange energy, points where captured ships' reactors still pulsed. By concentrating fire, human and alien ships shattered one of the beasts. Its body tore apart in silence, scattering into glowing fragments that faded into the void. For the first time, hope flickered. They could be killed, but victory demanded sacrifice. Human destroyers threw themselves into the enemy's path, detonating reactors at point-blank range. Alien squadrons held fire until the last second, then dove headlong into the void. Every small victory was paid for in lives, in ships that would never return. Still, the line held. Still, the galaxy fought together. For one burning hour, survival outweighed hate. At the climax, the largest of the creatures emerged. Its body dwarfed even the greatest battleships, its form woven from dozens of captured fleets. Its presence crushed sensors across the battlefield, leaving ships blind. The silence deepened until even voices cut out, leaving crews to fight without orders, without connection. Fear threatened to break them, but then a signal pierced the void. It came not from human command or alien fleets, but from the crippled cruiser that had carried the warning. Against all odds, their systems flared to life, broadcasting a single message across every channel: Strike the core, together. The fleets obeyed. Human ships hurled every missile, every beam, every torpedo they had left. Alien fleets concentrated. Fire until their weapons melted in their mounts. The void exploded in light as the massive creature convulsed under the assault. Its body cracked, split, and at last burst apart in a silent wave of fire. For a moment, the battlefield was still. The enemy had been broken. Humanity and the empires had survived. But the silence was not gone. As the debris drifted, new signals stirred at the edge of the galaxy. Stronger, larger, more numerous. The battle they had fought was not the war. It was only the first test. The admiral stared at the readings with hollow eyes, his crew silent around him. The alien commanders, too, felt the same weight. The enemy had not sent its full strength. It had only sent scouts. And then came the final twist. Among the fragments of the destroyed creature, human sensors picked up faint transmissions. Not random static, but voices. Familiar voices. The missing fleets were not dead. They were trapped inside the silence, screaming to be heard, distorted, but alive. The creatures were not just weapons. They were prisons. Every soldier felt the weight of this revelation. Their loved ones, their comrades, their enemies, all taken, all bound within. The war had not ended. Humanity and the empires had only won themselves time. To fight the silence meant more than survival. It meant finding a way to free the lost. As the fleets limped back into uneasy formations, wreckage burning behind them, every soldier knew the truth. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity was no longer alone, and neither were the empires. They were bound together now, not by peace, but by necessity. And in the distance, beyond the shattered stars, the silence waited. Watching. Calling. The battlefield drifted in silence, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the slow tumbling of wreckage. Human ships, what few remained intact, floated beside alien vessels that only hours ago had been sworn enemies. The largest of the enemy creatures was gone, torn apart by combined fire, but victory tasted hollow. Sensors still picked up faint signals at the edges of the void, new shapes waiting to come. Everyone knew the fight was not finished. What they had destroyed was only the first shadow. Yet in that moment, something had changed. Humanity and the 5 empires had fought together, however briefly, and in doing so, they had proven survival was possible. On the human flagship, the admiral stood quietly as reports came in. Whole squadrons lost, colonies scorched, supplies gone. But then came the message no one had expected, fragments of human voices detected within the wreckage of the enemy. The missing fleets were not gone after all. They were still trapped somewhere inside the silence, their signals distorted but real, for the families waiting on Earth, for the soldiers who had thought their comrades lost forever. This revelation burned brighter than any victory. The war had stolen much, but it had not taken everything. There was something left to fight for beyond survival. There was hope of rescue. The survivors aboard the crippled cruiser had given the last of their strength to send the message that turned the tide. Now, as their systems failed completely, they drifted in darkness. Yet they did not despair. They had seen the truth spread, seen humans and aliens stand together, seen their warning finally break through. As their ship's lights dimmed for the last time, the officer who had carried the logs whispered into the recorder, "If anyone finds this, remember what we learned. We are not fighting for borders. We are fighting for every soul still trapped in the silence." His voice faded with the ship, but his words would echo across the galaxy. On alien command vessels, the weight of the battle left cracks in old arrogance. The Varen speaker, once so sure of human treachery, stood pale and shaken. He had watched his finest fleets vanish without explanation. He had seen weapons fail as if the void itself mocked him. For the first time, his pride faltered. And in its place came the question he had never asked. What if humanity had never been the enemy? The Mirren elders, too, could no longer deny the echoes in their archives. The hunters their ancestors had warned of were real. Their crystalline halls, once filled with certainty, now rang with unease. The Draxis warlords who had reveled in conquest were forced to admit their beasts had howled not at humans, but at something far older. Even the Thalm swarms, scattered and bloodied, now whispered in their collective mind of fear beyond prey or predator. For civilians on the ground, the aftermath was a strange quiet. They emerged from shelters to see skies burned black, stars hidden behind drifting wreckage. Many wept at the sight of human and alien ships still standing side by side, not as enemies, but as survivors. On colonies where fire had rained down, survivors helped one another regardless of banner because survival had erased divisions. For the first time, ordinary people saw that humanity's strength was not just its fleets, but its refusal to surrender even when the galaxy itself turned against it. The broken fleets limped back toward safer space, carrying the scars of the battle and the burden of what lay ahead. Repair crews worked tirelessly, patching ships that should never have flown again. Engineers studied the fragments of the destroyed creature, searching for answers. What they found unsettled them even more. Evidence that the silence was not just consuming fleets, but reshaping them, fusing them into something new. The missing fleets were alive, but trapped within prisons of their own twisted hulls. Rescuing them would mean more than building weapons. It would mean unraveling the silence itself. In human command halls, debates raged over the next step. Some argued for immediate preparations to strike again, to be ready when the next wave came. Others urged diplomacy, pressing for alliances with the empires who had now seen the same truth. Still others demanded focus on rescue, insisting that bringing back the lost fleets mattered more than holding territory. The admiral, weary but unbroken, listened to them all. In the end, he gave the order that would shape humanity's future. Prepare for war, but fight for the living. Every resource, every ship, every soldier would be committed not only to defense, but to saving those still trapped in the silence. The empires, too, faced choices they had never expected. Their pride had been shattered, their fleets bloodied. Some leaders still clung to old hatreds, vowing to destroy humanity once the greater threat was gone. But many could not ignore what they had seen. Alone, they would fall. Together, they might endure. For the first time, emissaries were sent, not with ultimatums, but with questions. What would it take to stand together against the silence? And so the galaxy stood at a crossroads. The war that had begun in fear and wrath had ended in revelation. Humanity was no longer silent. Its fleets, though broken, still carried voices. Its people, though wounded, still carried resolve. The 5 empires, once enemies, now saw in humans not weakness, but endurance, the kind that refused to bow even to the void. The silence had not destroyed them, it had forced them to rise. Yet the final twist lingered. In the deep void, far beyond the reach of sensors, the silence pulsed. Within its depths, the voices of the missing fleets grew louder, distorted cries blending into something stranger. Not just calls for rescue, but patterns, signals layered into a code no one yet understood. Some believed it was the prisoners begging for release. Others feared it was the silence itself learning to speak. Whatever the truth, one fact was certain. The enemy was not finished. The first battle had only opened the door. As the survivors of humanity and the empires rebuilt, one thought bound them all. The silence was not a void to endure. It was a storm to face. And if the galaxy had any hope of surviving what was to come, it would not be through division or conquest, but through the unity born on the day they all realized they were fighting. The wrong war not for the people of Earth, for the colonies scarred by fire, for the empires shaken from their pride, the lesson was clear. Survival was not enough. They would need to fight not only for themselves, but for the lost voices still trapped beyond the stars. The silence had taken fleets, lives, and peace, but it had also given the galaxy one final chance to stand as one dot. And as the wreckage of the great battle drifted in the void, carrying echoes of the missing fleet's cries, humanity's message, to the stars spread clear and strong. We are not silent anymore. We are ready.